Arielle Mondrea vanished just 7 days after leaving her husband for Australian billionaire Alistair Wynnmark, setting off a chain of secrets so calculated, so cold, that investigators later realized her disappearance was never an accident, but the final step in a plan designed long before she ever boarded the plane. Arielle Mondrea's life had always followed a predictable pattern, built on the quiet routines she shared with her husband, Darren Mondrea. Their small home near the coast carried the scent of the sea, the sound of passing boats, and the steady rhythm of familiarity. But beneath Arielle's calm exterior, a restlessness had been growing for years. She often stared out of their kitchen window, imagining a life that felt bigger, brighter, and filled with purpose. She never expected that a single online course would open the door to something that would pull her away from everything she knew. When she joined a digital entrepreneurship mentorship program, she expected nothing more than basic training videos and group calls. Instead, she discovered that its most high-profile mentor, Alistair Wynnmark, frequently interacted with participants. His reputation reached far beyond the business world. He was an Australian billionaire known for discreet investments, quiet influence, and a lifestyle that only a few could understand. Arielle admired him from a distance until the day he messaged her directly. Alistair began by offering constructive advice about her business ideas. His tone was generous, encouraging, and unexpectedly personal. What started as guidance soon shifted into long conversations that stretched late into the night. Arielle, who often felt unseen in her marriage, found herself drawn to the attention. He told her she had potential, that her mind was sharper than she realized, that she merely needed someone willing to invest in her dreams. With every message, she drifted a little further from Darren, who noticed her increasing distance but didn't know how to reach her anymore. After a few weeks, Alistair presented an opportunity that seemed too good to decline. He offered her a position at his Innovation Institute in Melbourne, an invitation that came with the promise of a life-changing income and the chance to start over professionally. He insisted that the role required privacy, focus, and independence, suggesting she should travel alone. Arielle told herself it was a professional decision, yet the excitement she felt was tangled with something deeper, something she didn't dare name. The night before she left, she couldn't sleep. She listened to the quiet breath of her husband beside her, wondering if she was making a mistake. At dawn, she placed a handwritten note on the kitchen table, explaining that she needed time to find herself. Then she walked out the front door without looking back, her suitcase rolling softly behind her. Her flight to Australia felt surreal. She watched the clouds through the window and tried to imagine her future. When she landed, she expected to see Alistair waiting, but instead she was greeted by a driver named Corbin Halden. He held a small sign with her name and spoke barely a word as he took her luggage. His silence unsettled her, but she tried to remain calm. Perhaps this was how things worked in the world she was entering. As the car moved away from the city, Arielle grew uneasy. Melbourne's lights faded behind them, replaced by long stretches of farmland, scattered forests, and vast open spaces. She asked herself why she wasn't being taken to a corporate building, but she remembered Alistair's words about wanting privacy. The road narrowed as they approached a gated estate with high fences and unmoving security cameras. Corbin entered a code and the gates opened reluctantly, as if granting entry to a place few ever saw. Inside the estate, Arielle was met by Marcellin Drake, a man with an unreadable expression who introduced himself as the operations manager. He handed her a schedule outlining orientation procedures and instructed her to remain inside until further notice. She followed him through quiet hallways that felt more like a controlled facility than a retreat. Her room was luxurious, yet it lacked the simple warmth of a normal home. It reminded her of a hotel designed for someone who wasn't expected to stay long. That evening, she attempted to call Darren, but couldn't find any signal. She moved from one corner of the room to another, then into hallways, then to the garden outside, but the result was the same. No reception, no connection. The estate was isolated, shielded from the outside world. She felt a slow chill travel through her as she realized how completely she had stepped into someone else's control. And without knowing it, she had entered the last 7 days of her life. Arielle woke the next morning to an unusual silence, the kind that made her feel less like a guest and more like someone being observed. The estate was enormous, yet she saw no other residents and heard no signs of daily life. No footsteps, no conversations, not even the distant hum of activity. Breakfast had been left outside her door on a tray, neatly arranged but impersonal. She felt the absence of human presence more sharply than she expected. Marcellin Drake appeared shortly after, handing her a binder that outlined her evaluation tasks. These tasks seemed vague and unrelated to the innovative work Alistair had described. They consisted of written reflections, personal assessments, and questions about her loyalty, her fears, and her motivations for leaving her old life behind. It felt less like a job orientation and more like psychological profiling. Arielle completed them with caution, unsure what these answers would determine. Throughout the day, she noticed that every hallway in the estate had security cameras, all precisely angled to catch every movement. Even the garden had discreetly positioned sensors. During an afternoon walk, she tried again to find phone reception, hoping to reach Darren or at least send a message explaining where she was. But every attempt failed. The air felt heavy with surveillance, as if invisible walls surrounded her. At dinner, another tray appeared outside her room. The routine was beginning to feel mechanical, isolating, and controlled. She pressed her ear to the door before opening it, trying to hear footsteps or voices, but there was nothing. She began to wonder if the staff intentionally avoided her or if the estate housed fewer people than she thought. That night, while trying to sleep, she heard a soft mechanical whirring above her ceiling. It repeated in short intervals, faint but distinct. She looked up and noticed a thin seam in the ceiling paneling where the noise originated. It reminded her of a hidden camera lens adjusting its focus. A feeling of unease settled deep in her chest. She pulled the blankets around herself and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally forced her eyes closed. On the third day, she attempted to explore more of the estate. She ventured into a large library filled with expensive books and rare artifacts that seemed untouched, as if they were placed for show rather than use. A locked door at the far end caught her attention. Its keypad had a strange sequence of symbols instead of numbers. She remembered the late-night conversation she had with Alistair, where he told her how much he valued security and privacy. Now those words felt different. As she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the hallway, a shadow slipping around a corner. She quickened her pace, but found the corner empty when she reached it. The shadow lingered in her mind for the rest of the day, making her wonder if there were others living in the estate who were being kept away from her, or if she was being monitored more closely than she realized. On the fourth day, Marcellin collected her completed binder without offering feedback. Arielle asked when she would meet Alistair, but he simply said, soon. That wasn't the answer she wanted. That single word carried a weight that made her uneasy. She realized she had no idea where Alistair actually was, whether he was truly on the property, or if her presence there served a purpose she didn't yet understand. By the fifth day, she woke with a tightening in her chest. Something felt wrong. Her meals were now delivered later, her tasks became stranger, and the estate seemed even quieter than before. She began to question whether she had been brought here for work at all. When she walked past a window overlooking the woods, she noticed tire tracks disappearing into thick trees, leading to a place not visible from the estate grounds. It made her wonder what vehicles were coming and going unnoticed. As night fell, she watched the estate lights flicker once before stabilizing. The power never failed in places like this without reason. She sat on the edge of her bed, feeling the walls closing in, realizing that every passing day brought more questions but no answers. Arielle sensed she was being prepared for something, but she couldn't yet understand what that something was or how dangerous it would become. Arielle began her 6th morning at the estate with a growing sense of dread. The air felt thicker, as though the walls themselves were holding secrets. Her breakfast tray came later than usual, and this time, the utensils were missing. It seemed small, but the change unsettled her. It hinted that someone had decided she no longer needed them. She carried the tray inside, studying it with a frown before setting it down untouched. She tried to distract herself by exploring areas she hadn't yet seen. The estate felt like a maze, grand yet strangely hollow. The vast marble entry hall, the high arching windows, the quiet indoor garden full of orchids, all seemed designed to impress, but lacked the warmth of human activity. It felt like a display house waiting for an audience that never arrived. Arielle walked slowly, tracing her fingers across the furniture surfaces. No dust, no fingerprints, no signs of life. Near the east wing, she discovered a long hallway lined with locked doors. Each one had a symbol similar to those on the keypad she had found earlier. She leaned closer, trying to decipher them, but they looked like coded sequences rather than numbers or letters. The hallway was colder than the rest of the estate, and she felt a faint draft from underneath the doors. She wondered if these rooms held equipment or archives connected to Alistair's business, or perhaps they concealed something else. As she turned away, she noticed a small red light blinking above the corner of the ceiling, a camera she hadn't seen before. It wasn't like the others, which were large and clearly visible. This one was tiny, barely noticeable unless someone was looking closely. Her stomach tightened. How many more were hidden like that? Arielle returned to her room and decided to search it carefully. She opened drawers she had ignored before, checked behind framed paintings, and ran her hand along the baseboards. On the underside of her desk, she discovered a small metallic disc embedded into the wood. It was smooth with no visible lens, but she recognized it as another sensor. She didn't know whether it monitored sound, movement, or something more advanced. The discovery left her trembling. That afternoon, she heard a low rumbling coming from outside, an engine, heavy and slow. She rushed to the nearest window and spotted a large black van approaching the estate's garage area. It had no logos, no markings, and tinted windows that reflected only the cloudy sky. Corbin Halden, the driver who had picked her up at the airport, stepped out of the front seat. He moved with mechanical precision, opening the rear door and checking the van's interior before guiding it into the restricted garage space. Arielle pressed herself closer to the window, trying to see inside before the garage door shut. For a split second, she caught sight of something metallic, long rectangular containers stacked neatly in rows. She couldn't see what they held, but their uniformity and secrecy made her uneasy. When the garage door closed, the estate returned to its unnatural silence. An hour later, Marcellin Drake appeared outside her room with a new set of instructions. He handed her a sealed envelope and told her to complete the task inside by evening. She waited until he walked away before tearing it open. Inside was a printed sheet asking for a detailed account of why she believed she was chosen for this opportunity. The paper made her skin crawl. It felt less like an evaluation and more like a psychological extraction. She wondered how her answers would be used. As she sat at her desk, staring at the blank space below the questions, she became aware of the hidden censor underneath. She slid her chair back and decided not to write anything. Instead, she folded the paper, tucked it beneath her pillow, and walked out of the room. She returned to the East Wing hallway, determined to learn more. She moved quietly, listening for footsteps. Near the last door, she found a small panel on the wall slightly misaligned. She pressed her fingers against the edge, and the panel shifted, revealing what looked like an emergency override switch. It glowed faintly, as if wired to something deeper inside the estate systems. Before she could examine it further, she heard the faintest sound, a soft click like a camera turning or a lock resetting. She stepped back immediately, heart pounding. Someone, somewhere, had just reacted. That night, Arielle sat awake in her bed, staring into the darkness. The estate felt alive, watching her, studying her. She couldn't shake the feeling that every move she made was being recorded, analyzed, measured. And for the first time since arriving, she wondered whether Alistair Wynnmark had ever intended to hire her at all, or whether she had been brought here for a far more dangerous purpose. Arielle woke on the 7th morning with the heavy feeling that something irreversible was approaching. The estate, once merely unsettling, now carried an oppressive tension that clung to every corner and shadow. The lights in her room flickered twice before stabilizing, something that had never happened before. She sat up slowly, listening. There were no footsteps in the hallway, no trays of food waiting outside, and no sign of Marcellin Drake. The absence felt deliberate, as though the routine she had become accustomed to was being dismantled piece by piece. She cautiously left her room and walked through the corridors. The estate felt different, colder, dimmer, and strangely rearranged. Lights in certain hallways were turned off, forcing her to walk through long stretches of shadow. A faint hum echoed from the West Wing, a sound she had not heard before. She followed it, her heart pounding as she moved deeper into the estate than she had dared venture in previous days. The sound grew louder as she approached a door she had always seen locked. Now it stood slightly ajar. Arielle pushed it open just enough to peer inside. What she saw made her back stiffen with fear. The room held rows of screens showing various camera feeds of the estate, every angle, every corridor, every room, including hers, was displayed. She saw herself on one screen, captured just moments before she stepped away from her bed. Another screen showed Marcellin Drake moving rapidly through a corridor with a tablet in hand, his expression tense and focused. In the corner of the room was a long table with several files laid out in neat stacks. She recognized her name on the nearest one. She stepped inside, unable to resist the eerie pull of knowing what had been recorded about her. She opened the file and found pages filled with notes documenting everything she had done since her arrival. The exact time she woke each day, how long she spent in each room, the number of steps she took, the moments she paused before making certain decisions. Every detail was analyzed and categorized. There were even predictions, lists of what she was likely to do next based on observed behavior. Arielle felt the room closing in around her. This was not a professional selection process. It was mapping, patterning, and psychological testing. She was not part of a professional selection process. She was part of an experiment. As she scanned the other files, she noticed unfamiliar names, people she had never met, each labeled with similar behavioral notes. She wondered if they too had been brought here under false promises. She opened one at random and froze. The file ended abruptly, stamped with the word that sent a chill racing through her. Terminated. A sudden noise from the hallway jolted her. Footsteps, quick, purposeful, and getting closer. Arielle closed the file, stepped behind a tall cabinet, and held her breath. Marcellin entered the room, tapping rapidly on his tablet as he muttered to himself. He looked agitated, glancing repeatedly at the camera feeds. Arielle could see one monitor displaying a countdown timer she had never noticed before. It was set to expire in hours. Marcellin hurried to the control panel next to the screens and entered a sequence of commands. The image on one of the larger monitors shifted to show the garage area, where the same black van from before was now parked. Several metallic containers were arranged beside it, the lids open. Arielle strained her eyes trying to see inside, but Marcellin's body blocked most of the view. After several minutes, he left, the door closing behind him with a sharp click. Arielle slipped out from behind the cabinet, her breath unsteady. She stared at the countdown timer and felt a cold realization settle into her bones. The estate was preparing for something connected to those containers, something connected to the shadowy names in the files, something connected to her. She needed to leave. Arielle hurried down the hallway, her pulse thundering in her ears. She reached the main entry doors, but they were sealed tight with thick mechanical locks that hadn't been there before. She ran to the garden exit, also locked. Every possible exit had been reinforced as if someone anticipated her attempt. She moved toward the east wing. The lights above her flickered again, this time accompanied by a low alarm tone, not loud enough to alert the outside world, but enough to warn those inside the estate. She was no longer wandering freely. She was being hunted through corridors she thought she understood. Every decision she made had already been predicted. Every step she took was being watched. And for the first time, Arielle understood she might not survive the night. Arielle moved quickly through the darkening corridors, her pulse hammering with a desperate urgency she had never felt before. The low alarm tone continued in intervals, echoing faintly off the walls of the estate like a warning heartbeat. She didn't know if the alarm meant that she had been detected or if the countdown timer she saw earlier had reached another phase. All she knew was that something terrible was scheduled to happen, and she was running out of time. She reached the back section of the estate, where large windows overlooked the dense woods. The sun was beginning to set, casting deep orange streaks across the sky and long shadows across the floor. Arielle pressed her palms against the glass, hoping she could pry open one of the panels or shatter it. But the surface was fortified. Not a single line cracked when she pushed with all her strength. It felt like reinforced ballistic glass. Her hope of breaking out through the windows vanished immediately. She forced herself to keep moving, heading toward the mechanical room she had passed earlier in the week. If she could find the estate's power source, she might be able to disable the locks or cut the cameras. The hallways grew dimmer with every step, and the faint hum she had heard before now vibrated through the floor. She reached the end of the corridor and pushed open a heavy door that led to a lower-level maintenance area. The air was cooler here, filled with the scent of metal and machinery. Rows of generators and server towers lined the room, blue and red indicator lights blinked steadily, and the machines emitted a constant, unsettling drone. She walked between the towers, studying the wiring. She didn't understand the full scope of the system, but she could see the network of controls feeding into a central panel. If she could disrupt it, even briefly, it might give her a chance to escape. She spotted a lever clearly labeled Emergency Override, Authorized Personnel Only. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. Before she could pull it, she heard the sound of metal rolling behind her. She spun around and saw a security drone emerging from the shadows, its small wheels gliding silently across the floor. The device was no larger than a backpack, but its blinking sensors tracked her movement with precision. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a coil of cables. The drone emitted a sharp chirp, and a thin red laser scanned across her torso, stopping at her chest. It wasn't a weaponized drone, at least not visibly, but she didn't want to find out what it could do. She turned and sprinted toward the door she had come through, but the drone accelerated, cutting her off. Arielle darted behind a server tower, her breath ragged. She spotted a loose metal pipe resting on the ground and grabbed it. The drone rolled closer, its sensors narrowing like eyes preparing to strike. When it came within reach, Arielle swung the pipe with all her strength. The impact sent the drone skidding across the floor, its sensors flashing erratically. Before it could recover, she struck it again, shattering the casing and silencing it completely. She stood over it panting, realizing how close she had come to being immobilized or worse. She ran back to the override lever and pulled it down with force. The estate's lights flickered violently. The hum of machines faltered. A moment later, emergency backup systems activated, but not before the main power grid suffered a temporary disruption. Arielle didn't wait to see what else might shut down. She bolted from the room and headed toward the east corridor, where she had earlier discovered the misaligned wall panel. The hallways were darker now, lit only by red emergency strips running along the lower edges. Alarms echoed distantly like mechanical whispers. Arielle reached the east wing, found the panel, and pulled it open again. This time, the switch inside was glowing brighter, as though the power disruption had rebooted certain systems. She hesitated only briefly before pressing it. A soft click sounded nearby, followed by the sound of a heavy lock releasing. Arielle turned to see that one of the symbol-marked doors had partially opened. She ran toward it and pushed it fully open. Inside was a narrow staircase descending underground. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The staircase spiraled downward, the air growing colder. When she reached the bottom, she found a long concrete hallway. At the end of it was another door, this one slightly ajar, with faint daylight peeking through the crack. Arielle rushed toward the door, her heart leaping.
Arielle ran deeper into the woods, pushing through low branches and thick patches of ferns as the sky dimmed behind her. The fading daylight filtered through the trees in long, broken rays, casting shifting shadows that made every direction look the same. Her legs burned and her breaths came in sharp bursts, but she didn't dare slow down. The alarm still echoed faintly from the estate, carried through the trees like a distant mechanical scream. She knew they weren't meant to warn her. They were meant to alert whoever controlled the estate that she had escaped. She stopped only when she reached a fallen log covered in moss. Leaning against it, she tried to steady her breathing. Her clothes were torn from branches and her skin stung with scratches, but she couldn't stop now. She had no sense of where she was. The woods felt endless, an unmarked labyrinth surrounding the estate to ensure no one who tried to flee could navigate their way out. Arielle listened carefully, hoping to hear cars or voices, anything that might hint at civilization. Instead, all she heard was the rustling of leaves and the distant caw of a bird. She pushed forward again, determined to put as much distance as possible between herself and the estate. After nearly an hour of climbing over roots and weaving through dense thickets, she stumbled upon a narrow dirt path. It looked worn, as though used occasionally but not regularly. Desperate for direction, she followed it, hoping it would lead somewhere safe. As she walked, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Tire tracks. Faint but unmistakable, they ran parallel to the path, disappearing into the woods behind her. She crouched down, examining them closely. They were recent, too recent. Someone had already entered the woods with a vehicle capable of navigating the rough terrain. The realization tightened a knot in her chest. Corbin Halden had driven a similar off-road vehicle when he picked her up from the airport. If he was the one searching for her, she needed to move faster. The path led her to a small clearing where a rusted metal fence stood partially collapsed. Beyond it, she saw remnants of an old utility shed, abandoned, neglected, and covered in vines. It wasn't safe, but it offered temporary shelter. She squeezed through the broken fence and approached the shed cautiously. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and decay. Tools lay scattered across the floor, coated with dust and dirt. She found a thick canvas tarp in one corner and used it to cover the lower half of the doorway, camouflaging her presence. She sank to the ground inside the shed, exhaustion washing over her. Her thoughts raced, replaying everything she had seen in the estate, the files, the countdown, the containers, the camera feeds. She now understood she had been chosen not for a job, but for something far darker. She wondered how many others had been taken before her, how many never made it as far as she had. The force outside remained still, but her instincts warned her that the quiet would not last. Minutes passed, then an hour. Night fell quickly, bringing with it a biting cold. Arielle wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm. She considered leaving the shed to search for a road or house, but the woods had become pitch black. She would be moving blindly, easy to track, easy to corner. She forced herself to remain still, even though she felt vulnerable sitting alone in the dark. Around midnight, she heard the unmistakable sound of an engine drawing closer. The low rumble grew louder until it was directly outside the clearing. Headlights swept across the trees, illuminating the fence and the front of the shed. Arielle held her breath, pressing her back against the wall. The vehicle door opened and heavy footsteps crunched across the forest floor. A beam of light cut through the darkness as a flashlight scanned the area. It passed over the broken fence, then the trees, then the shed's exterior wall. Arielle squeezed her eyes shut, terrified the light would pass through a crack and reveal her presence. The footsteps drew closer, stopping just outside the door. For a moment, the silence felt unbearable. She could hear the person breathing, slow, controlled, as though listening for movement inside. The flashlight beam traced the edges of the doorway, brushing briefly across the tarp. Arielle froze, her muscles locked. If the person pushed it aside, she had nowhere to run. Seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. Eventually, the footsteps retreated, and the person returned to the vehicle. The engine roared back to life, and the headlights swung away, disappearing into the forest. Arielle didn't move for a long time. She stared into the darkness, realizing she had survived the first night. But the estate's reach was far from over. They knew she was somewhere in the woods. They would keep searching. She needed a new plan, and she needed it before dawn, because by morning, they would return. And next time, they would not leave without finding her.